The introduction of the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 wasn't an immediate difference in the gaming landscape, but the 7th console cycle would prove to be a huge change for the industry. As asset cost would balloon to unsustainable levels for the AA space, a lot of developers would close their doors as it became too much to bear. Devs would either sink or swim, and it was a bloodbath, particularly on the Japanese end of development, with priorities radically shifting. While some would move to handheld development, most devs went to appeal to the Western market, with games like Dead Rising and Lost Planet being notable early examples. From Software defied this somehow, and would retain their eccentric energy for the first half of the generation. Games like Enchanted Arms wouldn't exist without this line of thinking.
Toya, do you know what day it is today?
It's your birthday, right?
That's right! Wait, no it isn't.
I love him. As partially covered in the last video, Armored Core was slowly losing relevance despite incredible releases in 3, Silent Line, and Last Raven. And with a change in hardware, a new era was enacted to try and get new players into the series. A brand new story with its own timeline, a brand new gameplay ethos, and a brand new aesthetic with that same series foundation that would result in Armored Core's 4th generation, with those games being Armored Core 4 and Armored Core 4 Answer. Armored Core 4's intro is a fantastic showpiece and introduction into 4th gen. It shows the terror that is the new style of mecha, with the new ones being called Nexts, with their pilots called Lynx. It showcases the new primal armor system and highlights the new focus for this generation: speed. It's a new world, full of frightening power and destruction, all at the hands of a single Next. The shots and visuals of the cinematic is eye candy, and the score helps sell its grandeur. Fantastic stuff. As we move on to the title screen, this is, from what I can tell, the beginning of the modern FromSoft title screen, and it's the best one of its type. You know what I'm talking about, right? Like the Souls games just having its logo on a black background. Here, well, you saw the screen. It uses its initial darkness for purpose and cohesion. Its score has this mix of awe and solemn melancholy. Starting the game, we get a first in the series, a full-fledged tutorial. It tells you a lot of the nuance of the control scheme and shows off new mechanics. We can go into the gameplay details later. Just know that you should choose regular B if you want to play the game. All of the other ones are not great at handling the speed that this generation encourages. You also get a choice in beginner AC. There are a lot of options here, each with their own pros and cons. Almost all are associated with a specific corporation and their parts, as well as a difficulty advisory. The beginning cutscene has an older gentleman describing a past situation of a mercenary and their operator, Fiona.
It was the death of a legend and a mass pilfering of technology. The man she saved was an unrivaled raven paired with a next craft, used by research and development in their experiments.
They were a part of a colony, Anatolia, which in the past made most of its income on innovative technology. As that eroded away and no longer became their specialization, they became forced to rely on the money of their mercenary for survival. He laments on this mercenary as the only way the colony could survive, that they would become the catalyst for this conflict.
He was simply the only one who could have made it happen.
Afterwards, you're given access to the menu, but let's just jump into the first mission. That same man gives us our briefing and describes this as our chance to make a name for ourselves.
Now commencing mission. Normals are the enemy's primary force. Eliminate them.
As you get your hands on the game, It looks pretty different, with its new, sleek UI and presentation, but the foundation of the game's feel is also quite different. This is the first game that feels like it was designed with two sticks in mind, and while stuff like turn speed still exists, it's a huge leap forward in feel. Let's cover the foundation. You still have your old, basic movement with boosting by double tapping to gain vertical height, and your left and right-handed weapons, but there are a few new things. Quick boosting allows for fast, short boosts that are explosive and really fun to use. The shoulder weapons are different, with that replacing the extensions in old games, but essentially serving the same purpose. You still have your energy gauge, a radar that has been overhauled to convey better vertical location, and the rest of the flourishes. All of this makes a game that is much easier to read and removes a lot of the cruft of older games, putting the focus squarely on movement and combat. While that cruft of older games created a gameplay environment that felt like you were truly in control of an armored core, here it feels like you're handling a quick and lethal monster. As you get better and better, it evokes the same feelings that a power fantasy brings, which isn't a negative thing whatsoever. Just look at how many tanks you instantly demolish as your first enemies. The AC you control is the next evolution in warfare, past conventional tanks, past MTs, and past normals, and armored core next. What conveys this even further is the new defensive mechanic, your primal armor. Nexts employ this world's new technology for use in incredible defense, which is a huge damage mitigation tool. It's this shield that deflects a lot of force, and its power is associated with this bar next to your health number, and when it runs out, you take a significant increase in damage. This technology is what sets Nexts apart from other forms of warfare. Without this tech, most enemies just crumple like tissue paper. You can also use this meter in the returning overt boost, so it's not just for defense. Now, the question might come up, why don't all forms of warfare use this tech? This tech, which is referred to as Kojima technology, emits Kojima particles which are incredibly radioactive, like instant ruination levels of destructive. Some missions later completely restrict your usage of the system because you don't want to affect the few remaining livable zones on Earth, which mostly consists of colonies, Anatolia being one of them. For how little Armored Core 4 goes on to actively tell its story, it has a lot of implications like this that make for great world building. Regardless, when you beat that first mission, Fiona exclaims that the man who gave you your mission is ecstatic, that man being Emil. Things are going in the right direction to get more jobs to keep Anatolia afloat, that one thing is for sure. Afterwards, Emil continues his opening recollection by describing the then current world state. Companies dominate the planet under totalitarian rule, the Pax Economica. Their outward goals were divvying up the planet's remaining resources after the National Dismantlement War. They controlled the planet's economy completely, which forced people into colonies, into lives of harsh labor just to eat. Sounds like slavery to me. GA was formerly the largest corporation and the one who gave you your chance in the previous mission. They only did so because they were far behind in the development of Nexts and their power, far from the former first place in dominance. Their stance at this point in time was that mercenaries were just useful as political tools, as GA had just used us for. Only being the result of politics and its consequences, mercenaries would slowly become more popular in this current setting, with you being among them. If you're wondering, why is the game opening up with all of this detail? Then I don't blame you. It's a really soft opening. It doesn't portray its first mission as an inciting incident. It's more worried about telling you the political details of its setting before offering a hook. I think this detail on how and why things are happening are interesting intricacies, but it needs to have a primary action to describe. It's a lot of telling rather than showing. This problem is one of the core issues of the game's story. It tells you a lot of details without a broad narrative to attach it to. Obviously, important things are happening throughout the game, but it doesn't feel like it as you play, but we can get into that during the story analysis. For now though, this kind of detail is most of what you get. Now, around this point, you're gonna want to dig through the menus to customize and change your next. Now, what? Old menus could be nested and a little weird, but they used consistent terminology, so if you knew what to look for, you could still find it. For example, the garage. You could use this to change your AC, to buy parts, all of that stuff. In 4, you see, hey, the Y button goes to the garage, so you press it and What the hell? You have to go to the ASIS if you want to go into what the garage was. Now, paint, test, and tutorial are all pretty self-explanatory and do as advertised, functioning as they did in earlier games. Painting your next is better than ever, with even more color manipulation options and decal applications, which is a cool addition. The decals you can use range from unlocked emblems to your own custom-made ones, but those custom-made ones have been highly restricted. While I think it's too limited for its own good, you can get decent results from it. It'll never look as good as a pre-made one, and while you can argue most people would have never made an emblem that was as good as the unofficial one in earlier games, at least you had a chance. Regardless, the paint option in this game is an improvement. Now, the rest of the menu looks okay, but we've gotta talk about it. There are two options at the top: weapon and assembly. You might click on weapon first because it's first on the list, but you're making a mistake. So, when you first click on it, it tells you can't modify a company's schematic and need to make your own. So it lets you make a new one, with some options to modify it. But what does category and protect even mean in this context? Past this menu, you can finally change your weapons, but even selecting these is bizarre. So you have a slot selected, right? You have to scroll horizontally through an invisible list one at a time, only seeing the current selected option. But wait, data only? You're actually in the shop as well. The game does not make this clear whatsoever. You can equip these as if they're things you own, and while this does have the benefit of seeing if different parts match together well, it's not clear what's happening at all. If you want to buy something, you have to press X, which is labeled as menu. This has a pop-up that displays the part's price, and if you want to either buy or sell the current part. If you try to exit the menu without purchasing everything, a pop-up is like, hey, pay up for everything up front. I knew about this menu beforehand, but it can catch you off guard pretty badly if you don't understand what's happening. Now, if you go into assembly, it's a really similar menu to the weapon selection screen, only for AC body parts. But these are nested menus. When you press RB or go to the bottom option, you end up at the booster screen. This game features 4 boosters and devotes a whole menu to it. Go forward in the tiered menu and you end up at the weapons again, huh? Do it again, and you end up at a stabilizer screen. This is a new and unique system to 4th gen, where depending on where weight is on your next, it can make it unbalanced. You can put stabilizers on multiple specific points to balance out your next, or to deliberately unbalance it. This system is not required at all to perform in the game at a base level, but it offers depth if you want it. There is an option to automate it, but this pop-up happens every time you enter the menu, so it gets tedious. Nested even further is the FRS tuning system. During important parts of the title, you get points that you can allocate in specific stats to make your AC numerically better. It's a very light RPG element that doesn't change your build a ton initially, but it can add up to decent changes when combined. It's still in a weird nested menu though, but this part is self-explanatory thankfully. This menu is a total disaster. I assume the intent was to have the ability to equip multiple parts at a time, then use the test to see if you enjoy a specific set of parts that you're currently selecting. However, the amount of issues that are new, in addition to existing because of the nesting as well as a lack of clarity, are obvious and detrimental to a new player's experience. It isn't game ruining though. The economy of the game, like how much money you get from missions for example, is pretty lenient, so you can get away with owning a lot of parts and buying a lot at once. You can use this temporary selection for another function too. Passed around Chapter 2, you get access to the simulator. This is just the arena from earlier games in a different form factor. Instead of climbing a ladder of progressively harder opponents, you get packs of company-specific nexts. Because it's a simulator, you can use whatever build you want without owning the kit, which is pretty cool as a feature. I found it pretty easy, but your mileage may vary. While it being called a simulator is decent, it's confusing as to what its initial meaning might be. This in combination with the ASIS being the old garage, and the new garage and 4 being an AC showcase screen, just makes general navigation confusing for longtime fans. These changes might be mistaken as changes that the new localizers and publishers made in the West. The AC series from this point forward was no longer published by Agetec. 4 specifically was published in the States by Sega. Now, whether or not the localization is accurate or even good in context with the original Japanese version is outside of my wheelhouse. I don't speak Japanese, but these menu issues and name changes are not unique to the English version. These changes were already made in the Japanese version. These issues were from the source, and it should be addressed as such rather than using something benign and reductive like calling it woke or some other nothing word. I feel like I have a little more integrity than that. As mentioned earlier, the game's progression is divided into chapters. Between each chapter, you get a narrative cutscene, and usually an ending mission where something of at least minor importance happens. Sometimes, though, you get interrupted via an urgent mission that takes precedence because it's time sensitive, and while it doesn't happen often, it makes the general flow more interesting and dynamic. It does a lot in making the mission progression more than just a menial selection of tasks. A lot of missions are a little bland, though. Most of the early and mid-game ones mainly involve destroying average MTs and normals, and while certain ones can be tricky due to numbers, this game gives you a lot of time to get adjusted to your next. It's alright under these circumstances, but I found the game kinda easy outside of a few encounters in the standard playthrough. In selecting missions, you don't get a briefing until after you accept it. You get little info before choosing a sortie, and this prevents players from adapting their builds to missions, although it isn't necessary to do most of the time. The briefings do provide integral details, however, it's all from Fiona. It's not often stated from the corporations on why they want you to do these things, and you don't get their overall energy or personality. A lot of the sauce and villainy that the corporations had in previous games is not very well showcased because of this, and that kind of sucks. GA America, the Bernard and Felix Foundation, Ekbal, Leon Mechanica, Ray Leonard, Rosenthal, Omer Science Technology, Technocrat, Aldra, Melez, Arisawa Heavy Industries, GA Europe, Akvavit, Cougar, none of these companies have a lot of time to define themselves, and there's almost too many of them. This is compounded by the removal of the mail system, which gets rid of a lot of flavor text that the games used to have, and it doesn't have a decent replacement. The game just lacks a lot of opportunities to tell its story, and because of that, the title doesn't have good momentum in its plot, and while you might think this would give Fiona a lot of time to develop as a character, she doesn't get to say much about herself. It's always matter of fact with her style. Now, I've been pretty negative on this title mostly, but Armored Core 4 is honestly pretty decent. Whether or not these negatives ruin the experience for you comes down to why you play games, but there are a few highlights I want to talk about. I just described the missions as being a little bland, but what helps immensely is the overall visual presentation. Armored Core 4 is the peak in the era illustrated by deep saturation of little colors, now using the darkness that was inherently no longer an issue on the then bright LCD televisions. Its barren, melancholic presentation is so potent that it upstages what would have been standard gameplay into being a more evocative experience. There are certain missions that use its colorless composition to deprive the world of its life. Others use this fog to enhance the scene, creating a dreamlike landscape, a kind of sad experience that portrays the environment as decrepit. This makes sense considering how many environments you use your radioactive monster in. You sustain life in Anatolia at the cost of destroying life everywhere else because the current world order necessitates it. It's pretty bitter as an experience. These details and presentation combine to create something that's better than the sum of its parts. Great stuff all around. Part of this experience is exemplified by the soundtrack that the game offers. Gone are the primary electronic beats of past games, now replaced by a grungy garage band feel with some of that melancholic orchestration in there for good measure. It's one of the series' best scores, and is incredibly distinct from the rest of the franchise. Well, other than its sequel. A lot of these just hit in a very specific way, and most are extremely listenable. This is truly a new era in tone, feel, and pace. It's just firing on all cylinders, maintaining a frenetic undercurrent with that moody feel in some encounters. As you progress in the title, you might get a handle on the intricacies of the gameplay and start to notice interesting mechanics, like how back weapons can be used by any weight class, and now you have a quick turn that involves turning in a direction with no movement input and pressing the quick boost button. It's an incredibly satisfying gameplay system to master. Chaining quick boosts and turning fast feels like nothing else. There's a reason why most who try out this series play this generation, and that's because, in general, both games are very smooth to play and have slick feel, but that slickness comes at a cost, and some would argue that the immediacy removes the immersion of piloting a complicated mech. I feel that there are enough mechanics to get in the way to retain that mecha feel, with stuff like turn rate and lock-on speed adding barriers that need to be played around to get success. Besides, I feel most of the mecha nuance in this game comes from the customization, and it's as simple or as complicated as you want to make it. While certain weapon balance and usage is limited to an extent, it's okay enough to make it for a fun gameplay system. There is also the freedom that comes from unrestricting left and right-handed parts, meaning that you can mix and match any arm part with another. This seems like a no-brainer by itself, but it's a big upgrade in context with older games having them being two different kinds of parts. As you want to start using different builds and strategies, you might want more than one next. Going back into the menu, the other main option that isn't ACES is the schematics menu. This is a replacement for the multiple AC loadouts that the previous games had. Now having those loadouts as blueprints you can save and load. This is a huge leap in this aspect. You can have dozens of different ACs that all load pretty fast and it's convenient to use. Another benefit of this system is the ability to load specific schematics for all other nexts in the game as unlocks. When you beat an enemy in the simulator menu, you get their schematic, and if you have the parts, you can essentially play as them. There are also company schematics so you can convert your AC into their flagship models, what they advertise as their brand. These are cool unlocks for people who want to dig in, to see how other nexts function. This might even help one learn how they're supposed to build if they're struggling to build their own next. This is maybe the biggest addition Armored Core 4 contributes. It's a huge feature. AC4 came out on the Xbox 360 and PS3, which had internal storage for games, meaning that updates were much easier to accomplish. As a result, AC4 had a few balance updates, which while 1.0 isn't as bad as people say, the newer patches, which the game calls regulations, made the game in its parts much more usable and effective. This is literally a game changer, but it is limited based on the version you play. In the US, only the Xbox 360 version got the updates, while in Japan, each version got all regulations. So don't play the US PS3 version of AC4 if you can help it. This is on top of regulations being different per console to make matters even more complicated. For example, missiles do higher damage the higher the frame rate, so that stuff needed to be accounted for when the 360 version runs so much better. Just weird stuff like that. Still, balance updates are better existing rather than not, and you can choose any individual regulation that was released, so you can choose whichever version of the game you want to play, something more games should absolutely include. As the game progresses, the value of you as Anatolia's mercenary rises to a next of importance, and you deal with things that are threats to the Pax Economica and its power. But as all this is happening, tension is rising between the corporations as they all individually race for power by researching and investing into Kojima technology. Such proceedings adds fuel to the fire that is the Corp's hatred for each other. It makes the stability of this already fake peace all that more unstable. Emil sees this as Anatolia's golden opportunity, which speaks to his motivations at the time. Things start to heat up from here, so if you're curious, spoiler warning. But there isn't a ton to tell here, so maybe don't worry about it too much. There are some gameplay spoilers later in the section, but otherwise, you should be fine. As you start to gain the trust of the bigger corporations, GA asks you to deal with some defectors in the GAE branch that were being funded by Aquavit, an ally to Ray Leonard. These defectors used to work for GA, but revolted to continue their dangerous research. When you kill them, Aquavit lashes out against GA and considers it a direct assault. Because they declare war and are allied with Ray Leonard and others through a web of alliances, the Pax Economica is broken, and GA with its allies fight back, leading to a senseless war. Anatolia's mercenary gains recognition throughout this, being compared to an original, which is a phrase some use to identify a surviving next from the National Dismantlement War. Fiona resents this notion and hates the burden that this places on Anatolia's mercenary. Emil can't bring himself to understand this sentimental emotion. Let's get a little history lesson on what the National Dismantlement War even was, and how humanity got to this frail state, past the current modern world. Accelerated overpopulation and world-threatening global warming had affected the resources that the planet had. As the world's governments slowly started to lose their ability to govern, the people's discontent grew. Terrorism and riots exploded in frequency, and the corporations of the world formed a military-industrial complex, which grew in power fast. There were 6 major corporations: Ray Leonard, GA America, the Bernard and Felix Foundation, Ekbal, Rosenthal, and Leon Mechanica, and they became the dominant military force on the planet. They gave up on serving through nations and launched a coup d'etat against all world government. With their advanced technology and their intense abandon to reason, they unleashed the Armored Core Nexts, monstrous machines that poisoned the ground they stood on. With less than 30 Nexts, they slaughtered the nation's armies and took control of the planet in just a single month. It was literally national dismantlement. And 5 years later, here we are, on the cusp of war without ideology or reason. As you continue to do missions, you get to see some of the consequences of further experimentation. One mission has you go into a Ray Leonard Next facility, where you encounter some new experimental Nexts that were remarked on after the mission. These were a further step in the Next program, which was a step too far. I'll let Fiona explain it.
I remember seeing something that looked like that next in some of my father's documents. The prototype Next. An evil machine that kills its pilot with psychic stress beyond human tolerances, while lethally contaminating the surrounding environment. It's beyond man's control. Its development was aborted and everything destroyed. Would someone really try to dig that skeleton back up?
So you might be wondering, that's pretty specific wording. Why was it connected to the human mind in the first place? Part of the reason why Nexts are so crazy is that its pilots possess a psychic link to the machine, as controlling it is that complex. Different people have different tolerances with the AMS system, and it results in some having to adapt to different styles of combat. These most recent prototypes are a step too far though, and it's crazy what lengths the corporations are going through to see what kind of killing machines they can create. Armored Core has a history of making pilots be augmented to control their ACs better, and this is a twist on that, where everyone has to be psychically and mentally linked to control their Nexts. Regardless, it's clear from the National Dismantlement War that they don't care about the ramifications of their actions to achieve what they want. They are willing to weaponize death machines in the Nexts, when the world's nations weren't, for the sake of total control. Afterwards, you get the job to destroy the Queenslands, which is the acting headquarters for the BFF Corporation. It goes down easily, even with its massive armada. The lighting and colors in this mission are particularly awe-inspiring. Fiona laments, saying she misses when things were calmer and didn't see the mercenary as a godly power, capable of destroying one of the 6 original companies. Because of this, an anonymous force decides to attack Anatolia with a massive unidentified weapon in a really cool set piece. It uses an extra viewport so you can gauge where you need to position yourself while aiming at its weak points. In my opinion, it's one of the better bosses in the series. Regardless, someone sent this weapon at us, and it isn't hard to guess who the sender was. With the BFF slowly losing its massive military infrastructure due to the attack on the Queenslands, and its structure being heavily reliant on that top brass, they crumble. Ray Leonard and Akvavi don't have very many allies left, and it leads them to ever-increasing desperate strategies, like the attack just seen. This begins the Lynx War, where massive colonies collapse and Kojima particles spread unabated. The 2 main Nexts on our side are the Anatolia Mercenary and Joshua O'Brien, and his Next, the White Glint, who is the star Lynx of the colony Aspina. Both of them are top of the pack, and it makes Emil fearful of their power.
It was enough to make even me, an ally, anxious, even afraid.
Over the next chapter, you deal with a lot of remnants from the BFF army, and a new Raelianard anti-satellite cannon and a really neat set piece. You also fight Aquavit's new force, Sol Dios, which is on its way to attack the largest colony in Asia, Sing. This is what the dissidents at the GA facility were creating, and Aquavit is using it for colony destruction. It's a full assault, and multiple colonies are endangered, so it's more than just you. White Glint is also here to help you out. It's a cool mission. The second half of this chapter has you tackling most of Raelianard's forces, mainly their squadron of Nexts. In particular, there's a mission where you team up with 2 friendly Nexts against 4 opposing. It's a fun fight, but pretty grueling if you aren't prepared or your allies die fast. Fiona laments that the protag doesn't deserve any of this, how they should escape from the conflict once the war is over. After this, there isn't anything like a top-tier Next protecting Raelianard anymore, so you go to their main headquarters, Exaville, to destroy it. It's got a really fascinating design as a building. You don't see a lot of stuff like this in this series.
When did things escalate to this?
How many people have to be sacrificed in order for the conflict to stop? Emil informs us that Joshua has succeeded in destroying Aquavit's headquarters as well. The Lynx War is over. A worthless conflict started over petty reasons, resulting in so much death, and the planet now being in ruin. While the conflict is over, the state of rule still keeps people living in fear and trapped in colonies, to the benefit of its leaders. One might assume Anatolia is safe for the time being. They would be wrong.
Hey. I guess there's little need for words. This is for the best.
Joshua O'Brien was forced to fight you in this monster to destroy Anatolia, and the protagonist has to defend themselves, putting Joshua down. In this act, Anatolia might as well have been nuked from the amount of radiation put out from the mercenaries next and this prototype. Now, who sent Joshua? Who forced him to do this? It was Omer Science Technology, a corporation we haven't talked about too much. Omer was a newer corporation that was Aquavit's rival, and was put on a defensive position early into the Lynx War and mainly hired Joshua for their objectives. This put him on the map, and after the war, Omer takes most of Raelianard's technology, including their experiments. Fearing the power of colonies and their mercenaries, they forced Joshua to pilot the original prototype next, and to eliminate the biggest threat to the current order, Anatolia's mercenary. While they fail, Joshua is gone, and Anatolia is nuked with all that radiation, still a massive blow to what the protagonist fought for. While Emil, Fiona, and the protagonist all live, they were sent a message to never mess with the current world order again, and that's where Armored Core 4's standard run ends, with disaster. There isn't a lot to talk about here, but the story does evolve the corporation's villainy by adding in the element of environmental ruination. It portrays them as having no morals, no permanent allegiances, no long-term goals, just a constant lust for power, as much power as possible. While AC as a series has dealt with these ideas before, this new flavor has a lot more kick to it, showcasing this iconography of nuclear destruction to make it more interesting. Like, if you consider the National Dismantlement War, of course nations didn't have nexts. Why on earth would they use something that would ruin the planet that they want to rule over? The 6 corporations don't have those reservations. They took the world, regardless of consequences. Then think about how it only took 5 years for a worldwide conflict to happen again, because they have no interest in keeping peace, only interested and invested in themselves. The war having no reason is endemic on the insistence of corporations to only act in the short term and their selfishness, the worst of human corruption and greed, exemplified in its total control. This is a lot of interesting commentary to think on. The story is fascinating and has a bit to chew on and has great world building. There is a core problem with this story, however, and it isn't the story itself. It's the way it's told. a lot of the details and world building I gave you isn't stated in the run. In fact, most of the story isn't stated at all. The entire story of the National Dismantlement War was told in an art and design book that came out for both 4 and 4 Answer. The lack of missions being from corporations themselves makes them feel so distant from the conflict, when it's literally about them. The story that is here is mostly told through Emil through his narration cutscenes between chapters, and his way of talking is very boring. During a standard play, for me at least, his speech was too wordy and lame to be immediately invested. When I was reading it while watching footage, like it's a novel, I put 2 and 2 together and understood the events and became invested. While playing and trying to understand it as a conversation, however, I started ignoring the words because I lose interest. It's going for this documentary feel with its somber music and slow energy, but it doesn't work at all. This is an incredibly personal gripe, admittedly, but this results in a story being boring while I'm experiencing it in the moment. Because these cutscenes are the primary narrative, and those only happen between chunks of missions with little to no written story, it results in a game that feels like nothing happens, when really important world-affecting things occur here. One thing that hurts the story as well is that the voice acting can sound non-specific. I'm gonna be honest, I only found out that the final battle was against Joshua O'Brien because I looked it up. A ton of the VO sounds too similar to each other, it's tough to tell them apart. Other than that, the VO is generally pretty dry, with the exception of Fiona. She's good in her performance. Fiona showing emotion during the highlights of the game helps sell the gravity of each situation. What also helps AC4's world is the aesthetics. It carries the setting and current motion so much here with its stark lighting and lack of color. All in all, I'm mixed on the story, while the content of it is generally pretty great on introspection. Upon doing research, it gains depth. Its delivery and first impressions are unfortunately pretty poor. While the game is pretty short on a normal playthrough, we aren't done. New to Armored Core 4 is a distinct type of hard mode. Earlier games restricted the targeting box on screen when hard mode was selected, but this is different. Every mission has an alternate version on this difficulty that changes things depending on the sortie. Some just add more enemies, and these are usually accompanied by new dialogue at least, but most offer a twist on the job, usually involving a new objective or mechanic to the fight. Let's show off a few examples. Early in the game, you are tasked with taking on a mercenary in transit and ambush him. In a normal mode, you do this. In hard mode, he sees you coming and jumps you instead. The mission that has you taking on the researchers that would result in Soldios, at the end, the next they said would be away from the area, shows up right at the finale to defend the zone, and she is custom made to defend its topography, making for a tough fight. Also, did you know that they made Joshua a Resident Evil tyrant in hard mode? It's kind of hilarious whenever he shows up. He has the same kind of phrase every time, and I was like, oh no. The game feels a lot more fulfilling when these are played. Certain missions appear a lot more complete in hard mode, like they were initially designed like this after coming off of Last Raven's development, and then they realized, hey, we can't have this new era start off this hard. This does lead to a few missions in normal mode feeling empty, so it's not a perfect execution of this idea. Still, hard mode rules, and I would urge you to try most of these hard missions if you find the main experience lacking. This could be the challenge you're looking for. I do want to talk about hard mode's final mission.
Is that really all? Maybe everyone is exaggerating about you.
It isn't clear who this is, but upon doing research, it's Sallow in his next Testament, Omer's top links. They're a backup, and it's a cool encounter. It confirms that Omer was the one behind Joshua's suicide run. Sallow is most likely there to kill whoever the victor was, whether it was Anatolia or Espina's mercenary that lived. Remember, Joshua wasn't aligned with Omer specifically. His primary allegiance was with the Espina colony, like the protagonist with Anatolia, so they most likely viewed him as a potential liability. Killing 2 birds with 1 stone, yeah? This link also sets the idea that Omer was the one behind attacking Anatolia throughout the entire game, and not Ray Leonard. But that's just my interpretation. Either way, such scheming is just evil and malicious. The corporations fear what they can't control, so they seek to eliminate it rather than reconcile. Armored Core 4's multiplayer is the standard deathmatch modes that we've become accustomed to in the series, with 1v1s, team-based fights, and free-for-all modes. They took out the AI options to fight against them with friends, and I do find that a shame. They did, however, add in 4v4 matchups. You can have a lot of people fighting at once. Likewise, this game was the first one to have online play worldwide. There's ranked and casual play, and you can search for all kinds of settings. You can even set what regulation you want to do, so if you and buddies like a particular part balance, then you can stick with that. You shouldn't expect to find natural matches though. You should probably go to the AC Discord if you're interested. Split screen is also an option. Oh. Now granted, it's much more usable nowadays considering the size of televisions has grown, but this is kind of an insane setup. It does run well, so there is a benefit to having such a tiny bit of screen real estate. Regardless, you can also exchange schematics online. This is a pretty cool addition if you want to trade with someone. As a funny aside, in an interview with Natoshi Zin before the game came out, they apparently wanted other non-combat modes for player to use their ACs in to just chill online. It's a shame it didn't come to fruition, but it's really interesting to see what kinds of ideas devs have before stuff like this gets cut or never made. Armored Core 4 is one of the weirder games in the franchise. It's the first to be a complete reinvention for the sake of attracting a new audience, and as a result, it lacks a lot of the quality of life that the series had built since its inception. Stats go back to being not explained, menus have regressed, and the removal of old ways to deliver its story has crippled its narrative. Still, as a Year 1 7th gen game, it's a very solid foundation for further refinement. Unfortunately, most of the critical reception didn't see it that way. Most see the new game systems as an improvement and good at getting newer players in, but it's good that most of the game's critics didn't play all of the game's content or have really shallow opinions for the sake of a good stinger. There are good things about Armored Core 4 though. The story, while not explained, is a great setup for world-shaking events to come and has some meaningful commentary. The aesthetics are on lock, and the revamped gameplay systems are fun and engrossing, if a little easy on a standard run. It just needed that refinement, so its potential can be realized. Is that why it's called 4 This intro expertly showcases what the game's all about. Spectacle, a ruined world, and how much of a force the Nexts are against their corporate foes. Arms forts, massive monstrosities that were created in the name of control. But more than that, this cinematic showcases the strongest emotion that 4 Answer displays, and that's its confidence. Confidence in its vision, its own themes, and most of all, its own aesthetic appeal. The game knows how cool it is, and this prep time currently being showcased is an obvious example. Nearly a third of the runtime for this cinematic is used showing off this pre-launch of White Glint, easily the most iconic Armored Core in the entire series. Angelic and dangerous, it's an immaculate design, worthy of a lengthy showcase. This intro isn't my favorite by any means, but the way it uses its build and anticipation to showcase the majesty of the Nexts and the arms forts is legitimately spectacular. This intro is iconic for a reason. We once again get a modern FromSoft title screen, but with that same AC4 flavor that still puts it above the later works. I love this game. I hope you're prepared to hear me gush about this game to no end. This was one of my favorite games of all time before I got back into this series with the announcement of Armored Core 6, and before this particular replay where I grew to love it even more. But let's talk about the actual game first, yeah? The tutorial is back from AC4, with a couple of new mechanics that we'll cover later. The craft or corporation selection is also back, and they mainly cover archetypes of chunky ballistics, elegant energy, general variety, and the aggressive specialist. These also cover the primary factions as well, with the final being an independent. Regardless of what we choose, we get an introductory cutscene that sets the stage. Around 5 years after the events of Armored Core 4, and more than 10 years after the end of the National Dismantlement War, the Earth is in a very frail state. Corporations remain in control of the world, forming a league that has a very tenuous allegiance. The ramifications of the previous war has left the Earth extremely polluted, leading to the creation of cradles, floating living spaces which contain half of the planet's population. Only the air of the higher atmosphere is completely clean, so most of the wealthy moved up there, leaving the destitute abandoned on the surface. That surface is battle-ridden, and armies fight to take control of the remaining resources for the sake of feeding the cradles. Also abandoned on the surface are the Lynx pilot and their Armored Core Nexts, feared because of their independent nature. They now work for a mercenary mediation group, Collard. They serve as the common force in the modern economic war, while the League uses arms forts to keep their position of overwhelming power. We serve as an unaffiliated mercenary and take our first job straight from the League themselves.
This is your mission. Eradicate the defensive units deployed in the Line Arc zone. As you know, Line Arc is the main base of the anti-establishment forces that oppose the Cradles.
Briefings have returned to showcasing the personality of the group asking for your services, and boy, what personalities do these corporations have.
Okay, here's the mission. The client is Omer Science Technology.
This is your mission.
Here's the mission. The client is GA America.
Even more than any previous game, these briefings really showcase their aesthetics, their demeanor, and how gross they are with the manipulative language they use. It's top-notch presentation, but let's get back to the first mission. We're being tested on our abilities by attacking one of the only remaining colonies on the planet, Line Arc. Their biggest asset, White Glint, is off doing their own thing, so the League uses us as an excuse to attack their primary opposition. It's so easy, selling the power of the Nexts against old traditional weaponry for new players.
Elite next! Damn it, not now!
As you can tell, this game got a huge speed increase. A lot of people online suggest 4th gen is rather anime in style, and this stems from how bombastic and melodramatic For Answer is. The gameplay is a part of this, and the differences other than speed come from under the hood changes that just make this entry feel better to play. For example, blades are way more useful in next combat now, having much faster activation time. Broader than that, quick boosting is more effective and uses less energy than in 4, so you can just mash it and go nuts. Doing this is such a blast. This game feels a lot snappier and less floaty in general, and these changes have a big effect on the title. Defenses also got affected, with ballistic and energy defense being more important, with that earlier primal armor system still intact and pretty durable. Said system now has a new potential function, which I'll showcase here. The assault armor is a replenishing attack that strips you of your primal armor, but deals a lot of damage and can be an extremely useful tool if you run out of rounds. This does leave you vulnerable to incoming attacks, and you can't use your overt boost, but it makes for interesting gameplay decisions and consequences. These decisions, like the rest of the series, are affected by what parts you equip, and this ability being granted by your overt booster. Some of these boosters don't have this function at the benefit of a better overt boost. Because defense is more important and primal armor is stronger, the kinds of weapons you need to choose if you're attacking nexts require more careful consideration. There are 3 different kinds of weapons for doing damage, and it's weapons that do good raw damage, good primal armor piercing, and good primal armor stripping. Weapons like missiles and rockets are great at doing raw damage, but it isn't great at doing damage to primal armor itself. Snipers and rifles are great at doing decent damage through primal armor, and can be great consistent options. Kojima weapons and machine guns are great at deleting primal armor, so you can make them more vulnerable to all damage. These small intricacies are important to next combat and can mean the difference between life and death. Another advanced mechanic that might be noticed during ladder play that is hard to spot but is really cool is what's called second stage boosting. When executing a quick boost, it might be tempting to always pull the trigger down fast, but if you pull it in slowly, but commit to a full press, you can get a stronger quick boost. See how that boost trail is longer and louder? That's how you know it's successful. It has really specific timing. It isn't always useful, but it's optimal to execute before using a chain of quick boosts. This chaining actually has a community name, which is, well, chain boosting. When you use a quick boost, you can execute another one in rapid succession, but only if it's in a different cardinal direction. So, for example, you can go from a quick boost to your left, then forward. Then you can go from there to your right, and then forward again. This builds momentum, can be good for mobile evasion. It feels incredible to pull off. This combines with the more usable quick boosts from earlier to create explosive combat. It's legitimately enthralling. Moving on to parts, you have so many more options in this game compared to 4. Nearly all part numbers have doubled, opening up so many options and enabling an incredible sandbox to create your dream next. The standards are here in rifles, shotguns, machine guns, and bazookas, along with more eccentric weapons such as all kinds of Kojima weaponry, dual blades, tri-back lasers, and combinations of everything listed into all kinds of builds. My first next build had machine gun weapon arms with a Kojima cannon on the back, and this light build could heavily damage high health targets while rinsing everything else with bullets. I often jousted with other nexts using the Kojima cannon, destroying them in one dangerous strike. It was so cool! But you need to use the building menu to get this done, and a bad one can disincentivize someone from wanting to experiment. So, off of the heels of Armored Core 4 and its nested menus, how is building that next in 4 answer? They fixed it. The menus function how you would expect, with stabilizers and tuning separated into their own menus. The navigation is fast, runs buttery smooth, and you can get descriptions on every stat again. It's back to being best in class, for the series at least. As for the music you hear, while AC4's garage theme, Grid Room, was a bop, 4 Answer's garage theme, Set the Sunset, has a melancholic feel to it while being engaging to listen to. It transforms simplistic visual presentation into something more professional. These basic gray tones with the black background and bold reds become a more unified artistic vision when mixed with the music. The track has these slow descending tones that soothes, while having a fast backing beat with the piano to not leave the track lifeless. It could have easily been a disaster track, but it comes together to help create the best AC creation phase in the series. It's more than functional, it's got an essential style, and it's a defining part of the game, more so than other installments in the series. For real though, Set the Sunset is specifically one of my favorite single tracks in the series, and is my favorite in this game. To me, it's the game's theme, of fierce action with melancholy sweeping through every area of its desolate world. But before we tackle the visuals, let's go into the audio. The music here advances the garage band feel of Armored Core 4 with the older electronic energy to create a wonderful concoction. It's grandiose, at times high energy, and full of style. While it might not be my favorite in the series, it's pretty excellent overall, and consistently instills a melancholic feel that permeates the whole experience. This extends into the visuals. The Earth by this point has been so ravaged and devoid of life for so long, and this is reflected in the color palettes as well as the openness of most zones. Some areas are very plain and don't have a lot going on, but this is also true of the planet itself, so while the environments can look a little plain, it makes for great atmosphere. When you do go to places that have life in them, the color returns, and these scenes are striking because of their rarity, which is a very intelligent world design choice. It's a pretty game, and it doesn't hurt that it typically runs better than most of its contemporaries, at least on 360, making the work age much better than many of its era. The framerate can tank seldomly, but it's acceptable. All of this, however, is only one half of the story, with the other half being the nexts themselves, as well as the new set pieces special to 4 Answer, Arms Forts.
Infiltrate the arms fort from the rear.
Arms forts in their encounters are usually the bigger moments in the game, making for extremely memorable encounters. With these monstrosities dominating whichever scene they're in, the empty environments suddenly have purpose, with the sole focus being you, and the mountain to scale. It's extremely confident in design. The game isn't afraid to stick its sole focus on the inherent majesty of these monsters. It isn't afraid of the simplistic visual focal point. And when the game doesn't use an arms fort and is instead a next fight or a cleanup crew, 4 Answer uses some really awe-inspiring environments as the focus of its beauty instead. A lot of these examples are endgame encounters, so I don't want to show them here, but just check out the story section later if you want to know what I'm talking about. This game also doesn't overload you with these spectacles and maintains reservation by keeping its usage of these spaces and environments paced and deliberate. These more generic missions make the more important moments so memorable and have their place. It's cleverly framed. So, what's the general flow of the game? Well, the arena is back in old style. In the Collard Order matches, you progress one next after another, with notable figures here and accounted for. Not to mention, like older games, when one dies out on the field, they disappear from the arena. This would be more effective if you could look at a list of all the links, like older games with their ravens, but it's still effective. This mode is a fun, more obvious addition that continues to be a good break from progression. We're back to that old style of mission and corporation selection. As stated earlier, most normal missions comes from one of 3 groups, each headed by GA America, Interior Union, and Omer Science Technology. These corporations are all financially dispersed and independent, and when you do a few missions from one of them, you gain access to some of their parts in the shop. For example, when you do Omer missions, you also get access to Omer parts, as well as old Rosenthal parts, which are similar in design, aim, and allegiance. Your beginning selected next will also affect the beginning shop as well, so choosing to do a string of missions that belongs to a particular group because you want a specific shop setup is another thing to think about in mission selection. You can't do all missions in a single run, so choosing these things can have gravity. However, you can usually finish 2 groups per chapter, so you aren't completely restricted in the types of ACs you can build. Each chapter usually ends with a forced mission, and always have a spectacle fight. Let's use the first chapter as an example. Well, it begins with you making your name out as a lynx, taking on smaller targets, escorting supply routes, another typical small-time fare. It ends with you being tasked to destroy the
Spirit of Motherman.
This is it, your chance to prove yourself.
VOB depleted. Purging. Those cannons will rip you to shreds. Focus on evading their fire.
The remnants of the old guard are finished. Finally enacted are the new companies, with few old corporations left to protect their place of rule. This mission is a true test, where players need to get familiar with all of their controls and learn to pay attention to the briefings, or else meet dire consequences. Not playing 4 first when I was younger, this is the moment I needed to learn the basics of the title, because it isn't easy if you aren't great at games. But if you pay attention, if you learn the basics, it's achievable by a lot of metrics. While the story presentation here has the same bones as 4, it's much more effective because of these mission cutscenes, which allow characters to speak more. The base, being the cutscenes between chapters, are much more purposeful because the narration is explaining things that are currently relevant, and the narrator has great energy. This also has great visual identity, with its film effects giving it this aura of uncovering long-lost history. I appreciate this approach rather than a documentary feel. This active discovery makes the game feel much more involved. One other returning feature are the consorts. Depending on which missions you choose and whom it serves, you have the opportunity to enlist links that also align themselves with these corporations, and if you're consistent, you can run into the same pilots more than once. It's arguably where you can see the game's humanity the most. Getting to know reoccurring pilots that are also just trying to make a living for that minute makes the world feel so much larger than is actually constructed. There are some characters in particular that I like, but we can talk about that later in spoilers. Chapter 2 continues on, and the standard missions amp up in intensity, with corporations getting more desperate in their attacks against each other. Arms forts appear left and right, and enemy nexts are a constant. The end of this chapter is one of the biggest fights in the game, and if you haven't already played Forester, just go do that. The game has an invigorating story, full of intrigue, the game plays well, it has amazing aesthetic, it isn't too hard, just go do it. Or stay. I don't mind either way.
Here's your mission briefing. We want you to take out Line Arc's strongest military asset, White Glint.
This is the operator of White Glint. You are trespassing in Line Arc territory. Pull back immediately, or we will respond with lethal force.
So it's Fiona Jarnefelt. What right have you to speak? You who brought down Anatolia.
It looks like you came to fight.
You can fight, I'll give you that. All those fancy aerial maneuvers won't save you. White Glint, all those silly legends, they die today. I've surpassed you, and now I'll prove it.
You are the same as we once were. Think. What are you fighting for?
Main booster malfunction. Is that what you were aiming for? I've hit the water. Boosters won't engage. Hull breach. Damn it, I'm taking on water. No, I can't go down here. Not now.
Is he sinking into the ocean? Just like that? Unbelievable. Looks like it's one-on-one. Confirmed. White Glint has been destroyed. Mission complete. You're more than I dared hope for.
There's a bit to gather here, like White Glint's true identity. You might have been confused earlier if you remember AC4, like, White Glint, didn't he die at the end of AC4? Who is this? And now we know. It's Anatolia's mercenary, the protagonist of the previous game, the final stand against the New Order in the League, which, given this context, it's no wonder why they want him gone. The dialogue in this fight also threads some more world building. Anatolia's fall was pinned on Fiona. Corporations will always hide their deepest, darkest secrets, and in a world controlled by them, the narrative around the world can and will be warped in the ways they favor. The past is fabricated truths, and Anatolia's mercenary fought for the surface in his angelic next. Unfortunately, he falls from heaven. The surface's savior is gone. Without Starva, the League's #1 links, also missing. Things come to a head when the power facilities for the Cradles are suddenly attacked, with you being on the defensive.
All defensive emplacements destroyed? They didn't last 20 seconds out there. Noblesse oblige, targeting the blue irregular.
Take out those nexts.
Well, we warned them already. Looks like they didn't take us seriously. Looks like I was the careless one. Forgive me. I gave you everything I had.
Enemy next destroyed. Guess that's it. They've thrown first-class nexts at us. Damn reactionary forces. What are they thinking?
A synchronized attack orchestrated by the terrorist organization Orca happens on all power sources for the Cradles, located at the Arteria facilities. With the majority of these strikes successful, the Cradles are now endangered. Orca is made up of links from all walks of life, disconnected from Collard, comprising itself as a small but elite group of nexts. The leader of Orca, Maximilian Thermidor, has one statement to the world.
League dogs, welcome to Earth.
Thus, Chapter 4 begins. You get some mission options as the fighting escalates, all from the League itself, defending the Cradles, destroying special Orca arms forts, or attacking anti-satellite cannons. Anti-satellite cannons? The Cradles aren't that far up into the atmosphere. These 3 missions are all pretty cool and offer moments of grandeur. After this, you attack the Orca headquarters, Big Box. Big Box was the GA America headquarters, the same kind of battle stations that corporations had as capitals in AC4, but was abandoned on the surface with the introduction of the Cradles. Orca seized this opportunity and took control. The League teams you up with the best Interior Union aligned next, Ryderplash, who is Collard rank number 3. Both of you are in charge of cleaning out Big Box, which is back at full defense capacity and has 2 of the most important Orca members in charge of protecting it.
This is Mulzel of the Orca Brigade. Welcome to Big Box. Let's give them a warm welcome. This is my time. No matter, I'm of no use anymore. For mankind's golden age. So this is the end of the line? I have no regrets. Thanks for the fun times, Mulzel.
Orca and the League try to take control of the largest Arteria facility left, the Cranium, with that being the deciding factor in the remaining powers of the Cradles. The League, however, suddenly withdraw.
Seemingly overnight, they began to disengage from the conflict. It was a secret pact. The League agreed to turn a blind eye to Orca. In return, Orca would protect the corporation's leaders and keep their dark secrets. It turned out that the Orca leadership were as calculating as their corporate rivals. Their own security came first. They also knew well that the aftermath of the widespread destruction would spur the reins of economic growth. Now, nothing could stop Orca. Nothing, except for Windy Fanshin and her allies. They broke off from Collard and began operating independently.
This is Windy Fanshin. I need your assistance. I want you to join me in a mission. We need to deal with the Orca forces who are planning to attack the Arteria Cranium. Without the Cranium, the Cradles will lose their wings. Many of the people who spent their lives breathing clean air wouldn't survive on the polluted surface. And that's all. I'm not gonna waste time with fancy speeches. Give me your answer soon. The Cranium's core is just up ahead. I am in your debt. Thank you.
I didn't realize you would sacrifice so much. We could use more soldiers like you.
You two. I guess you aren't content to rot with the rest of them.
Just look at this. Look at this! Have you seen a cooler environment? The fight is also kind of peak. I don't know how to articulate it past. It's very cool.
Enemy next destroyed.
Is this really my fate? To lose everything? Prepare your soul. These cowardly ideals. They will cause the downfall of humanity.
Humanity? I don't see humanity anywhere on Starva. And mankind would be safe to dream, floating among the clouds. Is that your answer? So be it.
Maltzel fell at Big Box, and Maximilian Thermidor at Cranium. In an instant, the backbone of Orca was broken. The League rewarded their Link saviors with glowing eulogies. They hunted down the remnants of Orca, and once again secured the dignity of their rule. We have at long last restored peace to our world, they proclaimed. The cradles continued to float serenely above the planet. Within them, people soon forgot the terrible danger that had threatened their existence.
So, do you like serving corporations? This is your ending. For the rest of us, we probably have a lot of questions. What were the true motivations of the cast? While going against the world order, against the corporations, is a noble goal, it seems like Orca had more up their sleeve than just this. What could that have been? If Otstarva was such a suck-up for the League, why did he betray them, fake his death, and launch a counteroffensive by leading Orca as Maximilian Thermidor? A lot more remains to be answered than this, but as a first playthrough, this will always be the core events. The game has more to tell, however. A lot more. Before we get to that, there's a bit of cool design outside of the game I want to talk about, and that is the Japanese box art. It's legit one of the best ever made, with the scale portraying White Glint as this insect against this unknown arms fort, the ruined surface against the sky, the free against the bound, the remnants of the colonies against the corporations. The design of this arms fort is magnificent in every way, but terrifying in scope and power. Also again, notice the lack of color displaying this desolation of the setting. It's perfect in portraying what the game is about. Let's discuss why it's special in this current context though. That arms fort on the cover, we just saw it in the closing cutscene, right? Why didn't we fight it? The primary focus of the cover not being an encounter? What's going on? This is an ingenious move. In this context, the game is subtly telling you to play the game again, to try and find this thing. It's there. You just have to go back and find it. And so, playthrough 2 begins. While playthrough 2 begins with the same events for most of the first chapter, you keep everything, including arena progress funnily enough. At the end of chapter 1, however,
so the new Lynx took down Muggleville.
Affirmative, Rhodey. There's no doubt about it. Collard twice confirmed the report.
So I guess this one is a real Lynx after all.
I hope so. What about the ones who attacked Arteria? They managed to launch a surprise attack on a cradle facility in broad daylight with complete impunity. Their leaders must be punished severely.
Indeed. If you cannot follow the rules, then you cannot be allowed to play the game. It's the same whether you are Reinhardt or the ghost of Rayleigh himself.
knowing where some of these characters end up in the story makes this an interesting cutscene. Collard's top nexts, each representing a different corporation. Otstarva with Omer, Lilium Wolcott and Wong Xiaolong with the BFF, Windy Fanshin with Interior Union, Rhodey with GA America, and Dario Empio with Rosenthal. They discuss Strayed, the main character's default name, and Otstarva especially takes notice. Also, notice how Wynn is very proactive in the punishment of those threatening the status quo. She is extremely eager in keeping the peace, so to speak. The Arteria facilities are already under attack. This was not mentioned at all in the previous run, which complicates things that were stated by the narrator earlier. Also, a ghost of Ray Leonard was mentioned. Wonder who that is. During Chapter 2, you can get a curious mission request that is new to this run.
Here is our request. Omer units have targeted Megalus for attack. Megalus is a power recycling plant and a key element in a line arc lifeline. The Omer forces will consist mostly of aerial attack units. Do you think you can drive them off and protect the lives of millions of innocent citizens? Of course, we will compensate you as best we can. Thank you in advance for your help.
Now, you start to see some of the truth. At the end of Chapter 2, instead of the one mission, you get a choice.
This is what we want you to do. The League is launching an all-out offensive against Line Arc. They have been trying to break us through indirect, surreptitious means for some time, but we have stood firm. Now they're dropping the pretense and showing their true colors. The ace up our sleeve is White Glint, but if the League comes at us with everything they've got, even that won't be enough. That's why we need you to be our trump card. The corporations abandoned the planet's surface and the people who live there. They are no longer part of a rational economic system that supports society. They have become no more than elitist parasites. You know the truth. A world ruled by the League is doomed. We, the people, must control our own lives and build our own future. Of course, we will pay you as much as we can. Please, help us in this fight for freedom.
The first true words spoken in the game. Now reject the corporations and defend humanity.
Those slimy politicians with all their empty calls to arms in the name of liberty. I'll sink the whole lot of you to the bottom of the ocean. You ready, Fragile?
Preparations complete.
Good to hear. Move out.
Commence mission. Cooperate with White Glint and eliminate the League Nexts. We've detected 2 enemy Nexts, Stasis and Fragile. Stasis? It's on Starva, the rank 1 Lynx.
White Glint operator Fiona Jarnefeld here. I appreciate the assistance. Good luck to both of us.
What? The main boosters have cut out. Damn it, I'm sinking. I can't go down like this.
White Glint is disabled. He cannot come to your help any longer. I'm sorry.
Now it is 1 against 1. Test applicability increased. Excellent. Energy flow is reversing from the AMS.
Confirm. Fragile has been destroyed. In the end, only you remain. I can't believe it. Just a brief moment of relief. Let's make the most of it.
Fellow Lynx, allow me to express our gratitude. Thank you. However, this might mean the end of Line Arc.
While the actions you take here are different, the ramifications are the same. White Glint still falls. You do get some unique attention in the following chapter, along with some extra dialogue.
They got too cocky for their own good. Especially our boy genius on Starva.
Maybe. Maybe not. Something about this whole thing stinks.
Yes, but we paid the price.
So you think you can take their place? What about Gerald?
What do you mean?
Nothing. It's just that old fogies aren't as much used to us now, are they?
Are you looking for a fight? Enough. If you've got something to prove, do it on the battlefield. I'm stopping you there. Besides, there is still a lot we have to discuss. For example, this Ontario assault. What are we to do with the survivors?
Notice how they still haven't dealt with the Arteria attackers, and no one other than One Xiaolong is worried about the attacks. Everyone is worried about the now, rather than the consequences of actions. Enormous egos at play here. As you progress through Chapter 3, if you've done the prerequisite missions, you might get a curious option.
Greetings. Maximilian Thermidor here. listen to what I tell you. Some fled to the cradles and live in the clean air. Others were abandoned, condemned to the Earth's poisonous surface. Maintaining this system is causing horrible pollution on the surface. That pollution will soon start bleeding into the atmosphere itself. The cradles are only a stopgap measure, a panacea. Humankind has no future on this planet unless we stop them. Perhaps you think I'm an alarmist, but I speak the truth. If you believe in what I say, then you must take this mission. Of course, you'll be reimbursed for your efforts. I await your reply.
Commence mission. The target is a good distance above your position. Start climbing. You know what you're doing, what it will mean, don't you? Confirmed. All targets destroyed. Mission complete.
You have shown me your answer. Welcome to Orca.
Now with this decision, you get access to a new option, that being the Orca Arena. This is where the toughest arena fights are stored, and it's a great bonus for discovering this path. You can just see a description of all the Orca members here, and look who it is. It's the Ghost of Raelianard, Maximilian Thermidor, or secretly Otstarva as we learned in the League ending when Windib blows his cover. There are some extra bits of info here, like how he serves to enact what's called the Closed Plan in Raelianard's stead. If you remember from AC4, Raelianard had that anti-satellite cannon, which was an option of attack in the League path. Orca has those same tools, but for what purpose will they use them for? Anyway, the League knows that some members of Orca exist, but not whom or what they serve even. Hidden away, constructing their plan. There are also some implications here from the Cradle discovery. Let's talk about that for a second. The Cradles being a stopgap in the destruction of Earth while also causing it is so emblematic of the short-sighted nature of the League. Their temporary solutions will ensure the eventual destruction of humanity, of their final death. People cannot stay in the sky, in these cradles, if they are ever to survive past their poisoned comfort. This is also the opposite of Armored Core's past, where in earlier games humanity would be trapped underground to their detriment. Now humanity is trapped in the skies because of the sins owed to those who control them. Under this lens, it's really neat. Continuing on the path of Orca, we get the opportunity to be on their side in the initial Arteria assault.
We are the Orca Brigade, the most dangerous reactionary force in existence, and this is our grand entrance. Let's put on a show, gentlemen.
This mission. Seize control of the Karpal's facility. Eradicate as many defensive installations as possible before Noblesse Oblige reaches the combat zone. That should make things go more smoothly. Enemy next detected. It's closing in fast. That's him. Obliterate Noblesse Oblige.
Sorry to crash the party. Little hit-and-run bandits like you know no honor. I envy your simple life, void of responsibility. I don't believe it. Noblesse Oblige. We still have work to do.
Confirmed. Noblesse Oblige has been destroyed. The closed plan is now underway. No regrets now. Remember, you chose this path.
One thing to keep in mind is that in the previous cutscene where they discussed Gerald, they were talking about Noblesse Oblige, the next we just killed. They sent him to his death to get rid of an old pawn that no longer had use in the modern era of nexts. Past this, the Orca War is on, and on the side of this said faction, the rest of the game progresses with a new set of missions, with another split. We'll talk about the crazier one in a minute, but for now, let's stick to the main path. We're to defend the anti-satellite cannons that we had the option of attacking in the League path, and here it is our single task.
These anti-satellite batteries are the linchpin of the closed plan. lose them, the future of humanity will be cast into doubt.
Commence mission. Protect the anti-satellite batteries while taking out the main enemy force.
This was the best I could do. You'd best turn tail and run, Wang Xiaolong. The battlefield is not a place for scheming old men.
We get a new cutscene, which unveils the truths and lays the groundwork to answer old questions. Before the National Dismantlement War, the Old Ways corporations waged conflict was through space exploration and domination. In order to stop their competitors, they created assault cells, which would destroy rockets attempting to escape the atmosphere. After this way of waging war intensified, the path to outer space eventually became blocked, leaving humanity trapped on the planet. This led to the rapid overpopulation and resource scarcity, which was the cause for the National Dismantlement War. The doom of the planet was caused and maintained by the corporations, condemning it to their greed.
Maximilian Thermidor made another proclamation. He said,
"The crimes committed by these companies are robbing humanity of its future. Eventually, they will destroy the entire planet. The National Dismantlement War and the Lynx War as well were waged to hide their crimes. Orca stands against them, fighting now to purge those sins. It is too late for compromises. Sacrifices must be made. The price we all must pay will be great. Atonement shall not be easy. The blame lies with all of us."
The anti-satellite batteries have already taken out their elite forces. Arteria is already halfway to obliteration. It should be easy enough now. We'll just pick off the most obvious targets first. When we're finished with those, they'll gladly return to the bargaining table. The old guard.
It seems like Orca has more interests than their self-stated righteous reasons. They seem to have their own selfish purposes for instigating conflict, but what those are remain to be seen.
This is Maximilian Thermidor. Your target is Answerer, a high-tech arms fork manufactured by the Interior Union in Omer.
Here it is, that carrot on the stick I was talking about earlier. Using a top-tier alien design to get players to see more of its story is an ingenious move, and it's amazing in execution, but enough fooling around. Let's take this thing out.
Commence mission. Destroy the arms fort Answerer. They must be using a massive amount of energy to keep this thing afloat. Start your attack run now. Hit it wherever you can. Destroy the outer shell. It won't hold up too long. We can bring this thing back down to Earth. The Answerer is plummeting. Watch out! Confirmed. The Answerer has been destroyed. Mission complete. So, this is the beginning of
Now
the
the tried and true power of the corporations has been destroyed, leaving only the deluded to fight in their place. But Wendy Fanchon and her allies are not to be trifled with, and Orca knows this.
Can you handle that? Remember, Wendy Fanchon will probably be leading their forces. That may be. I might not come back. But we all have to die sometime.
This is it, the final act.
Links of Collard. Thermidor here. If you are listening to this message, then I am already dead. Most likely at the Arteria Cranium. Maltzel will not return alive from Big Box. That leaves you as the sole surviving member of Orca. I'm asking you to do this in my stead. Take anti-satellite batteries can use the energy from the cradles to eliminate the assault cells and clear our path to space. It is all up to you now. Do this for your fellow Orca warriors and for all humanity.
Target the two next, Ryder Pelage and Myplus. You've chosen your answer. Now see it through.
Our guests have arrived, Wendy. Right on schedule.
You don't hesitate to kill for humanity, do you? Then lay down your own life, like Thermidor before you.
This is one of the tougher fights in For Answer, but as long as you dodge their attacks and have patience, you should be fine.
Destroyed. So ends phase 1 of the closed plan. You are the sole remaining Orca member.
To treasure a life, is that something to laugh at? Everything is twisted. You, this world, all of it.
Orca took control of Cranium. Without the energy needed to support them, the cradles fell to Earth. In the devastation and poisoned air of the planet's surface, infants coughed feebly in the arms of their despairing mothers, while the anti-satellite batteries continued their steady charge. When their power is finally unleashed, the web of assault cells over the planet will be destroyed, the sins of the corporations purged. Even as humanity is decimated, they will discover a new frontier, outer space. A new direction at last. It will be a time of growth, of ambition, and of war.
While the Earth has expired, the cost to even get a chance of humanity's survival is vast. Most couldn't even justify it, and Strayed goes through with it to give humanity as a species a second chance. Although, as already stated, corporations still hold ultimate power, and this gives them an out for more domination and more war. Still, humans can live, and one can hope that they learn from the mistakes of the past, but with devastation like this, they more than likely have to rebuild civilization from the ground up. At least that seed has been planted so that humanity might once again flourish and survive. This is the core conceit of 4th Gen. As stated in the art book, even if the Earth is scorched and beyond saving, we need to at least plant the seeds for the next generation, so that they might exist, because people deserve the chance to exist and to make the change they want to see. Beyond the main themes of For Answer, the game's narrative does so much right. The iconic characters, the scheming corporations, the scale, the stakes, it's so arresting from moment to moment. The core environmentalist themes also hit hard. To see these kinds of acts people have to make once the Earth has been so poisoned and polluted is really striking. The further pollution strikes at the Earth's health, the more extreme choices the people have to make become. Actions have consequences, and corporations acted without even the idea of consequence, because they only lived in the now. 4th Gen's framing makes this more potent than ever, and it's so effective. The people this world creates are changed because of the corporations and their power. Some are desperate to the reliance of the corporations, and are terrified of the loss of life at any cost. These people, like Wendy Fanchon and her allies, only serve for the short-term survival at the cost of the long-term. There are others like the members of Orca, who for one reason or another serve to liberate humanity from the shackles of a poisoned Earth, to open new paths of their survival. While the core narrative is essentially finished, there remains mysteries to character motivations. These are answered in the final path, in later hard mode. Let's check out that final path first, which begins as you become an Orca member late into the game.
Greetings, Lapdog. This is Old King. We're going to destroy Cradle 03. Care to join us? Orca has been too lenient for too long. In a revolution, blood must be spilled. Don't you think?
Good, you came. How obedient of you. Fill the cradles, all of them. Millions will die. Exciting, don't you think?
Just not a kill, huh? Nothing else? That's too bad. It's time for you and I to go our separate ways.
One down. 20 million dead. $40 million. 60 million. 80 million. 100 million. Done. There are still so many more lives to take. Our journey is just beginning.
Annihilation on a global scale. Reprehensible. Disgusting. Let's continue with the Pat's final mission.
Here's the mission. The objective is to take control of the large-scale Arteria facility, Carpals. This time, the details of the operation are up to you. You are to simply take out anyone or anything that gets in your way. Briefing over. The Union seeks only to secure the future safety of humanity and the planet. This mission is an essential step in realizing that goal.
Can I just say that this has so much sauce for a fake briefing? This is so obviously a trap. You're done.
Lapdog.
Please accept my apologies. That briefing you saw was manufactured. This is the end of the road for you. I think you understand why.
Well, it is what it is. Your actions were clearly deliberate. There's no point in trying to reason with you.
Maybe it's just an animal. Can it even understand what we're saying?
You think you're some kind of one-man army? You think it's your right to choose who lives and dies?
You killed too many.
Now you've dragged the ire of both Orca and the League. 4 nexts at once, with Old King by your side. Talk about a brutal fight. This is really tough, but there's a good strat I read way back in the day to use armed Kojima cannons. And with this strategy...
Soon after, the blood of the innocents would rain down from the cradles, all at the hands of a single lynx. One who will be the greatest monster mankind has ever seen, taking more lives than any other in history.
I guess certain things will bring everyone together to take a demon down, or at least try. There is one interesting bit about this mission, and that's the fact that Scorcher, the song that plays throughout, plays in only 3 missions of the game. Those missions being the first mission, the AF Stigaro mission.
Commence mission. Destroy the arms fort Stigro. His charging attack isn't too complex, but it'll rip you and confirmed. Stigro has been destroyed.
And this one. Some interpret this as Straid's main theme and shows off their true nature of a violent monster. That's up to interpretation though, and while I don't really agree, it is kind of interesting. There are some other bits that are interesting that we should talk about as well. Like if you choose specific missions, you can get extra cutscenes from Orca and the League. Most of these are ones that can be earned on a second playthrough if you choose the League path, and they unveil more of the consistent motivations which Orca members and the League have. They adapt to player choice too. Like if you choose to defeat White Glint, they exclaim that the plan wasn't perfect, but Adstarva's death was executed so they can initiate the closed plan. They also constantly have eyes on Strayed, wanting their power and skills for plans to come. These extra playthroughs react to this and give you the choice to accept Orca or League missions because of Strayed's heightened skills. There are also extra cutscenes from the League when you choose to follow the faction, with everyone talking about their current situation. It shows a little extra background on Wynn wanting to protect the cradles. The extra detail isn't crucial, but it really is cool to see previously implicit moments in the story. Let's also bring up the Arms Fort Answerer. It obviously has design lineage from something angelic, but there is more to it than that. Let's contrast Answerer with all of the other arms forts in 4-Answer. The Land Crab, Great Wall, Spirit of Motherwell, most of these either rely on the extension of pre-existing technology, like the Soldios cannons, or just a constant expansion of old-style weaponry, not reliant on the further research of Kojima technology. This tech is made to contend with Nexts and to control the planet without using Kojima. It's the logical endpoint of conventional tech. Such a concept is abandoned with the Answerer, which hums with excessive Kojima technology. Just listen to it. It may as well be asking for its death. It's unnatural and terrifying. Its design, in contrast with White Glint, also pits them as natural enemies. With the Answerer's design and function, it's like a man-made seraphim, a celestial weapon that man created for the sake of ultimate control, always remaining in the skies, serving the corporations in place of a god. It's not even designed to touch the ground. Whereas White Glint, condemned to the surface from the skies, like a fallen seraph who once served the corporations, as if an analog to Lucifer, fights for the people in its angelic form for the sake of freeing humanity from the total control of heaven. The Answerer, with its circumstances and design, continues to showcase the corporation's intense abandon to reason. To construct such a device, let alone deploy it, is so monstrous. This encounter is just so inspired. Anyway, now that we've covered the main story, future me, play every time someone says
Armored Core for answer.
Give me your answer soon.
Your answer.
That's your answer?
Your answer.
Chosen your answer. Answer you've chosen.
I want to talk about some side characters that can show up depending on the missions you choose. As mentioned earlier, when you consistently perform work for a particular corporation, you can choose the same consorts for multiple missions in a row, and with that you can kind of get to know them. For example, May Greenfield. She takes a lot of GA missions, and she is startlingly chipper in all of her outings, always keeping an upbeat attitude. Her emblem owns. She's great to be around. On the other end of this, Celebrity Ash, who also works for GA missions. He tends to be very quote-unquote brave. He likes putting himself above others, and is really abrasive, even though he doesn't have the skill to back up his smack-talking. When he cracks during the Soldios mission, it's really startling but kind of hilarious.
What the? A Soldios cannon? Are they crazy? How the hell can we scratch this thing? No good. I can't evade them fast enough.
Soldios cannon destroyed.
This great voice performance really sells the moment. Fragile, who is kind of a joke, has some interesting context. He's a test subject from one of the only remaining colonies, Espina. You know, the one that old White Glint Joshua O'Brien came from? And he gets used by Omer to try and kill the AC-4 protag again. It's pretty sad. Anatolia and Espina forever pinned against each other by outside forces. While I was editing, I had this thought of like Fragile in the Japanese version also having this blood-curdling scream. It's honestly pretty funny. Speaking of the Japanese version, there's also like a ton of interesting differences worth talking about, like certain cutscenes calling the economic war the war of power and amounts. How Atstarva, in his statement to the League, addresses the League dogs of the English translation as two nobles instead, implying that it's a war on the Cradles themselves instead of just the League. How the mission progression is slightly different in the JP version, or even how the early JP trailers have footage of cutscenes that don't exist in the final version. There's so much to talk about, but let's get back on track with the characters. You can also get Win and Atstarva as allies in some missions, and they are great to fight alongside with. Atstarva is stuck up as always, complaining that such things are below him, and he's right. Win, although she always sides with the corporations, has a great, spunky attitude. I do like her a lot. Talking about characters though, there remain a couple of mysteries about Atstarva or Maximilian Thermidor for example, and these get tackled in hard mode, so let's cover that right now. Hard mode in 4-Answer is really similar to AC4, but because there is so much more content in normal mode here, that means hard mode has naturally expanded. There remains a lot of encounters which are special to this, like Nexts appearing out of nowhere, the Vanguard overboost being altered, and a bunch of other cool stuff. We would be here all day if I spoiled all the cool ones, because all its moments are predicated on discovering the twists that each mission has, but I want to cover a couple bigger moments that happen to some characters showing their true colors. This comes to show in the final missions of the Orca and Old King paths. Let's take a look at the Orca's takeover of Arteria Cranium.
Thermidor, you betrayed us. This was your fight to begin with.
The man called Thermidor has already passed. The man standing before you is rank 1 on Stargate.
It seems as if Utstarva didn't ever intend to take the Cradles down, and wanted to use Orca to further his standing in his corporation of choice. Utstarva uses the promise of Raelianard's old ambitions and goals to his advantage, as a pawn of the corporations to their benefit. While some online believe that Utstarva is a true believer, that he fights to carry on Raelianard's ambitions, and goes through Omer specifically to liberate the Earth, this betrayal disproves that notion. Considering Omer's true nature in 4 was one of subterfuge, it makes sense that they would continue to do so through Utstarva. Some don't consider hard mode canon, and given how emphatic he was with his speech in the Orca path, his character is very much up to interpretation. He could be conflicted between both ideas of Omer or humanity, but we don't know what's going on inside his head. I consider hard mode canon, given how much extra dialogue and details here. Like, why would From Software have Utstarva's betrayal here if they never intended it to be read as a part of his character? Like, they could have had Rhodey or Wang Xiaolong here to establish more of the League in their attempts to stop you, but they didn't. They chose Utstarva specifically. This would make him extremely similar to Last Raven's Evangel. They have so much in common, both having an out-of-control ego, both using revolution for their own gain to climb their corporations, both using similar speech. It's crazy. It's so realistic to portray people who will take advantage of revolution to reinvent the status quo in their favor, to keep the old flames alive at all costs. Evangel wanted to gain even more of Alliance's favor. Alliance being all of that game's corporations combined into one mega entity. Utstarva, in turn, serves for Omer Science Technology specifically. Oh yeah, they're back to main villain status. Omer was a primary contributor to Orca's wealth, and in this context, is always pulling strings. They gave Orca the funding they needed to raise hell. They had Utstarva create the group in an environment that brought in Lynx, who were fed up with the current world order, only to torch it once they had caused enough damage to their ends. They leaked the info of the Orca headquarters to the League as an example. In one fell swoop, an environment was schemed that would spur economic growth and expedite all possible dissenters. When Orca holds the League hostage with powerful information in the League path, they have that chance to break free with Orca's bargaining table plan, but Windy Fanchon breaks them and their chances when they take back Arteria Cranium. Utstarva in this path maybe has a little faith in the Orca plan, and with backup, decides to go through with it, then meets his end. In the Orca path, they successfully destroy all of the Forsaken revolutionary faction because of their volatile power, but one remains, and Utstarva, with Wynn and her ally, attempt to stomp Strayed out of the picture, only to ultimately fail. Utstarva this time sees only Strayed against Wynn and her ally, and decides that Omer loyalty is more important. The plan of finally taking down the Cradles was never in the cards, only a glimmer of hope for the Lynx to then destroy them. So when it does happen, humanity is finally freed, but not necessarily to the dismay of Omer. So, when Strayed instead decides to torch it all, the system and all of its people decide you need to go, and they all decide to team up on you. But how could hard mode of this be even tougher?
To end up facing you like this. Too bad. You walked right into my trap. Stand still so I can cut you down.
Oh yeah, it's the best thing ever made. How fitting that your advisor, who sees Strayed become a monster, decides to take matters into her own hands to end her previous Lynx's life, using her previous next skills from AC4 as Serene Haze. Unfortunately, she fails.
Of course. I stood by your side for so long. If it's my time, who better than you to deliver the final blow?
While this fight is one of the toughest in the series, there are things like Kojima cannons and blades that make it possible, if you have enough patience, to lure them into areas of the map that give you an advantage. It's certainly no Zenaida from Last Raven, that much is for sure. It's also not the true ending, it's a bonus hard mode, so I can give this difficulty a pass. Also, another note about your navigator: if you do some digging and go back into AC4 looking for her emblem, which you unlock if you succeed at the hard mission, you can find your navigator, Kasumi Sumika. Sumika? I didn't know this before recording. This is such a cool reference. The first navigator in Project Phantasma also kicked ass, having so much in common with each other. It's so cool. For Answer puts so much effort into story, it's kind of unbelievable. The characters, the narrative, the setting, it's easily my favorite in the series. It just serves so much. It's so obvious that the same team who wrote Last Raven continued onto this game. The way the characters act, the way the plot unfolds, its ideas, all so similar in style, yet expanded and greater in execution. The way For Answer uses the medium of games and replays to tell and expand its story is genius. Using the main verb of the game, violence and combat, and framing that on how you interface with the consequences of that is so crazy. The interaction with the game is only under those lens, so making the story about the constant consequences of violence under a rule that is persistently destroying itself makes it so thought-provoking. The kinds of things in this story, like a genocide route, would get praised in later games, and this was in 2008. It was so ahead of its time, but let's cover version differences in the multiplayer before we sign off. In terms of multiplayer, For Answer has a surprising amount of options, plenty of maps, regulation settings, and great casual options like turning on respawning. I could never call myself an expert on the multiplayer, as it isn't my forte, at least for 4th gen, but it's pretty fun and fast. Now, they did add an actual game changer to For Answer, and the ability to play most of the game campaign co-op. The only missions you can't play mainly consist of the end of each chapter, but it's still a blast. It's best for one person to have beaten the game, then guide the other through the rest of it, as it is funky to set up consistent matches, but it's well worth it. Just go in with a friend or go to the AC Discord. Don't expect to find anyone randomly online these days, the game is 16 years old by this point. Armored Core 4 Answer is a stunning achievement and the culmination of everything that has gone right with the Armored Core series. The structure here is used to impressive effect, the gameplay is fun to pick up with massive amounts of depth, and the story is one of the best the studio has ever put out, not just in the series, but in any of their games. While most critics at the time bafflingly didn't think much of the game, it's From Software's magnum opus, a fitting end to their Armored Core legacy, right before they started their new legacy, with Demon Souls, and it's my favorite game in their entire body of work. An intoxicating, thought-provoking experience that is one of the best the medium has to offer, through its implications and constant awe. Everything coming together like this is usually a once-in-a-studio achievement, and it's stunning. Now, what's the situation for playing either of these games? Both released on the Xbox 360 and the PS3, and while I've gone over the weirdness of AC4's updates, there is the matter of performance. And while you can transfer your schematic data and paint data from AC4 to For Answer on PS3 and not 360, the frame rate on PS3 can reach abysmal states. While they can and will dip on 360, PS3 is so much worse that it's hard to recommend that version at all, unless you want to play a Japanese copy on PS3 due to it being region free. All of this is predicated on the fact that 4th gen is extremely expensive. For Answer is one of the most expensive games in the series, and most of that has to do with its legendary status, and featuring Hidetaka Miyazaki as director. We can't count on it on coming to Xbox backwards compatibility either, as Microsoft has shut that initiative down, not to mention, no AC games have come to that list. Now, considering the fact that For Answer was published by Ubisoft, there was the precedent that Ubisoft was willing to play ball with FromSoft on Enchanted Arms, which made it to back-compat on modern Xbox platforms.
Guys, why is Pizza Face an Enchanted Arms?
So it isn't the publishing rights for For Answer specifically, and Sega has a lot of titles on back-compat too, so it wasn't them either. We may never find out why AC was never added to the list. There are two other options, however, and that comes down to emulation on PC. You can either emulate the Xbox 360 versions of the games with Xenia, or the PS3 versions with RPCS3. Xenia is really limited in terms of options, but it runs near perfectly, little to no bugs, great performance, and much easier to get going on lower end hardware. RPCS3, however, has way more options and still has great performance, but the cutscenes are prone to stuttering if you're running an old version, and is a bit more demanding on your PC. High resolution For Answer is really enjoyable though, and on my replays, it is my go-to way for experiencing it again whenever I get the itch, and it's generally what I would recommend, but you can't really go wrong with any version unless you're stuck on an original PS3 or a really outdated version of either emulator. If you want to get it set up easily, again, check out the Armored Core Discord. They have an emulator pack that has RPCS3 set up and ready to go, with even online matches working. Armored Core 4th Gen is a tale of corporate evil that is an unnatural blight dooming the planet and the people who live on it, and how those people can break free to plant the seeds for the next generation. Armored Core 4 is an interesting game. Even with its weird intricacies and flaws, it sets the groundwork for what is, in my opinion, one of the greatest games of all time in For Answer. Everything works in tandem to create an unforgettable experience. 4 sets the stage, and For Answer delivers. It delivers in spectacle, in presentation, and in solemn storytelling. It's hard to think of games that hit as hard as this title for me. For Answer also shows that deep-rooted problems need drastic changes, and it provides an experience that is so cathartic to get rid of an Armored Core world of its demons, even after playing Last Raven. And you know, we might not be the main character of our reality, we might not have the power to make huge societal changes by ourselves, but that's okay. We can always plant the seeds in our own lives to make positive change. Even if it takes a little while to sprout, we need to start that change in the first place. Depending on what that change is, it might be tough, and it might have consequences depending on who you are or what people think you are. But you know what? I believe that us as people have the capacity to make that change, to give us and our loved ones the best chance at happiness that we deserve. Because people deserve happiness. As much as this feels like it could have been a brand new run, a new era for Armored Core, From Software didn't decide to do that. Instead, they decided to experiment with the partnership ideas in For Answer, to expand on them, to adapt to at the time modern design trends of cooperation and competition. The design ethos of the series would have to change again in accordance with that, but how do you adapt that line of thinking to Armored Core? We'll find out the answer soon enough. With Hey, thanks so much for watching. I hope I was able to explain why I love this gen so much, particularly For Answer. It means a lot to me, and it was tough putting into words honestly, so huge thanks to Lady Lena Cat for helping me with this script, Slade for helping me get console multiplayer and co-op footage, and my brother for extra script refinement. This video would not have been the same without their help. So, I already have 5 and Verdict Day recorded, so expect 5th gen sooner rather than later.
Hell yeah, kick that train!
This year has been insane for game releases again, so I might try to catch up on games like FF7 Rebirth, Eiyuden Chronicles, and SMT5 Vengeance as well. There are a couple of life things that happened as well that I'd like to mention. I moved! Kind of the main reason why this video took so long again. This was a change I desperately needed. With that out of the way, do all that liking, commenting, and subscribing that YouTube likes. Follow me on Twitter if you can stomach the place. And I should probably introduce myself to everyone. My name is Brooklyn. It's nice to meet you. Ah, finally.